Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am coming to you with my mid-month check-in for Victober. And I wish that you could see my full shirt. Yes, there you can see it. Isn't it just lovely? I'm obsessed with this. This is a new shirt, but I love the cranes on it. I am obsessed with the cranes. We're about halfway through the month of October, and so we should be halfway through the Victober readathon. And I am telling you, it has not been a great Victober for me. I'll just be honest, and I think at this point I'm just gonna have to call it a total failure, really. I've read and attempted quite a few things on my TBR, but for the most part, things have been only okay. Nothing has been great, which is really unfortunate. And I experienced some level of burnout last Victober, and I think actually I had kind of the reverse experience last year. I started out the month with a lot of really great books, and it set me up for failure with everything else on my TBR that just wound up being fine. And something now that I think I have learned about myself is just that every year at this time, I am more of a plot-driven reader at this time of year. I think I'm looking for something a little bit more pacey, and unfortunately, more than a few Victorian novels don't fit underneath that umbrella. I think every year I start out reading something like Wilkie Collins, and that kind of sets my mood for the month, and then the slower books on my TBR I'm not as enthused about. I thought I had kind of prepared for that this year, and that I had made sure to include a lot of really pacey novels or more sensation novels, more plot-driven and supernatural stories, which is something else that I really crave at this time of year. But I don't really know that it has worked out for me. So unfortunately, even though this is a mid-month wrap-up, I almost feel like it's going to be my Victober wrap-up in general. Last year, something that really helped me is that I did interweave a lot of more modern books to make sure that I didn't get burned out. I think I wound up getting burned out anyway, but I didn't really do that in this first half of the month, and I think maybe it would have helped me. So I think I'm definitely going to be taking a break from the Victorian reading anyway, just to kind of give my brain a break, and then maybe I will return to it before the end of the month. You never know. But let's get into the books that I have been reading for Victober this year. The first book that I attempted for Victober this year is a book I DNF'd, and I have to say, as of right now, I don't think it's a book that I plan on returning to, and that is Desperate Remedies by Thomas Hardy. So this was my pick for the sensation novel prompt. And when I describe the plot to people, I think it sounds super interesting. It sounds really good, and it sounds like the type of Victorian novel that I should really like. So maybe I won't call it a permanent DNF. Maybe I'll say that I will come back to this at another time. But I genuinely was not having fun. I was just not enjoying it. I got to the halfway point and I just said, I can't do this anymore. I really didn't want to start out Victober with a bad book or with a book that I wasn't really enjoying, because I did sense that that might set me up for failure in the rest of the month, and I think in a weird way it did. I will say this has made me really analyze my relationship with Thomas Hardy, and it has made me wonder whether or not I even actually like him, because when I sat down and thought about it, most of the books I've read by him or attempted by him, I have just thought were okay. They were 2 or 3 stars, or 2.5 or 3 stars. And there are a couple that really stand out above the rest for me and actually are 5 stars. And that's only 2 of them. For me, that's Far from the Madding Crowd and Return of the Native. And when I really thought about it, I've read 5 or 6 books by Thomas Hardy now. 4 of them are just okay. 2 of them are great. And I've always thought that Thomas Hardy should be maybe my favorite Victorian author, because he seems to be really interested in the same things that I'm interested in. He's very aesthetic. I love his writing style, but something about his characters really keeps me at arm's length, and even his plot. Sometimes I think I just don't get on with his plot. Even this, to me, this was, I think, his first novel. It felt to me like it had been done before and it had been done better elsewhere, even by him. I think there are things and elements that pop up in almost every single Thomas Hardy book. And I don't know if maybe I'm just getting tired of seeing those things. Now, I have never read the truly sad Thomas Hardy books. I've never read Tess of the D'Urbervilles or Jude the Obscure. And you never know. That may actually be the style of book of his that really works for me. So definitely I should try that. But this was my first DNF of the month, and I've DNF'd something else. We'll talk about it when we get there. Next, I want to talk about Dracula. I've already put him back on the shelf because I just thought he matched my little skull friend so well. He looks super good, but we all know what Dracula looks like, so I'm not even going to bother inserting a cover. So I listened to Dracula. This was the third time I have attempted Dracula. This time I made it to the end, and so I listened to it for the prompt about reading aloud or hearing a book read to you, and it was an incredible audiobook. It was done with a full cast. Alan Cumming and Tim Curry read the majority of it, and as you can imagine, that really elevated the experience for me, just hearing Tim Curry. Had it been Tim Curry all the way through, it would have been really excellent. A lot of people told me that if I struggled with Dracula, and I have in the past, that listening to it really helped them. And it helped me too. I will say this time around, I actually genuinely enjoyed the reading experience. I genuinely enjoyed reading it, but it still was just very run-of-the-mill to me. I rated it 3 stars. In fact, and I think that even might be a little bit generous. I remember now what some of my complaints about it were the first time I read it, and it had to do entirely with the female characters. This is so basic. It is such an angelic woman who's good and deserves all the best, and she's being targeted by this monster, and we need to protect her. We need to make sure that she doesn't even know what's going on. We need to protect her at all costs because she's so innocent and angelic. And that was the characterization of every female character here. I thought we were gonna go for something a little bit unique with Mina, who is the female character that I've heard the most about. And so I thought we were really gonna do something interesting with her because she frequently discussed the concept of the new woman, which came about in the late 1880s, early 1890s, which was essentially kind of a woman who worked, I believe. And so she was like taking a typing class. She was interested in getting work as like a secretary or a typist somewhere, which I thought was really refreshing. And then what happened to Lucy, who was the other main female character, eventually happened to Mina. And so it became like, protect these women at all costs, put them in a bubble. They can't handle this. But something that I did really love, one of the characters here, I can't believe I didn't know this and that I didn't remember it from earlier attempts at reading it. One of the characters is a genuine Wild West cowboy, and he is easily the best character in the book. I am obsessed with him, and so I think really I gave the book 3 stars because I enjoyed him so much. He was so stereotypically cowboy in the audiobook. I don't know if I would have enjoyed it as much just reading it physically because everyone gave him just this really strong Western Texas accent, and it was just really, really fun to hear him in the audiobook. On the whole, I am thrilled about the fact that I chose to listen to this on audiobook, and in a weird way, Dracula is one of the few successes that I have had thus far in Victober because I did actually finish it, but it's also made me really analyze my relationship with reading. I have given Dracula 3 attempts. I have read Dracula 3 times, trying to finish it and trying to understand what about it made it so popular. And really, I've tried to read it so many times because I have always felt like it's a book that I should love because I really love classic horror and I really love vampires. And there is so much about this that set up everything that we have today in terms of vampires and kind of the mythology and lore that surrounds vampires and that they can't see themselves in mirrors and all of this stuff. A lot of that shows up really for the first time in Dracula, which should make it very interesting and intriguing to me personally. But when I thought about the fact that I have tried Dracula 3 times, I thought about the fact that there are tons of books out there that I genuinely love and that I would really, in the end, probably have enjoyed rereading far more than I've enjoyed rereading Dracula. It's just funny to me that I'm willing to give more tries to a book that I know will ultimately get a very mediocre rating from me, then I am willing to return to stories and novels that I know that I really love. So Dracula has made me interrogate my rereading and why I try to make myself like a book that clearly I don't really care for. So Dracula is one that I don't think I'm ever going to reread, but I am very, very glad that I chose to listen to it on audiobook. And I think if you're going to read it, that's probably the best way to go. There's a lot about Dracula that was extremely disappointing to me because there were some scenes of immense greatness. There were some scenes of true horror, and there were scenes where you genuinely felt scared, but they were few and far between. So ultimately, I rated Dracula 3 stars. I also reread The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde this month, and I really enjoyed this at the time, but I think it has fallen quite a bit for me. This is a book that I have always considered one of my all-time favorites, and I've only ever read it once. I read it when I was very young, when I was in my early to mid-teens, and it just really struck me the first time that I read it. But this time around, I still experienced the same love for the writing that I know I did the first time. But this time around, I think, struggled with the characters. I really enjoyed the writing, of course, which I think is probably why I liked the book initially. I just like Oscar Wilde's writing style. And there's so much in terms of themes to dig into here with the relationship of art, and like Dorian has a relationship with an actress that he is sincerely only interested in because she is an actress and she occupies a different role on stage every night. And so he really is not interested in her as a person. And so there's really a lot there in terms of themes to analyze, like when you just like character or when you just like art, which I think makes this a really interesting book to discuss. And I think I would have enjoyed buddy reading this with someone because there was a lot I wanted to talk about. I rated it 5 stars again, purely because I feel like it deserves 5 stars. I feel like it's a very well written and tightly plotted book, but something about it just kept me at arm's length on this reread. And I'm going to say that I think it was me personally. I think I just was not in the mood to read this when I picked it up. I don't think I was in the mood to read a classic period when I picked it up. And so I do think the reading experience fell a little bit due to that. So I'm not going to drop my rating when I know it had to do with me personally. I know it had to do with my mood when I picked this up, but this was another of my successes of the month. I really enjoyed this. I just love the writing of it. It's another that I think would work very well in audio. I read this physically, but I can tell that this story would work really well in an audiobook format. And shock of all shocks to me, when I got this edition, I complained about the portrait on the front because to me, Dorian Gray has dark hair. He's not blonde. Shock of all shocks. In the book, Dorian Gray is blonde. I've had to make peace with it. I still don't see him as blonde, but I cannot believe he's actually blonde. And this could, in fact, be a portrait of him. I just don't believe it, but in my heart, Dorian Gray is a brunette. My next DNF is a book that I may or may not return to before the end of the month, and that's Deronda by George Eliot. I started listening to this on audio when I finished Dracula, and it was working pretty well for me in an audio format. I actually really enjoyed listening to it. It was the story and the characters that I really struggled with. So this book is called Deronda, but I think I got to maybe the 150-page mark. And the book has generally been about a character called Gwendolyn, who I despise. And y'all know that I love an unlikable female character in a classic, particularly in a Victorian classic. I am obsessed with them. She was unlikable even to me. And I'm sure throughout the novel she goes through some major characterization, but I just despised her so much that I did not want to pick up this book. So DNFing it actually had very little to do with the writing or the plot. It had to do entirely with the character of Gwendolyn. I did watch a video by Kate Howe the other day where she was talking about her favorite couples in Victorian novels, and a couple from this book turned up in that video, and it actually has kind of convinced me to move on with this. So I'm not going to call this a DNF. I'm going to call this something that is on my currently reading pile. So maybe this is one that I am really going to enjoy when I reach the end of it. Another book that I read and finished this month is Romola by George Eliot. And this is really shocking to me. I really enjoyed this and I read it very, very quickly. Like Dracula, this is a book that I have attempted many times before, and I've always DNF'd it because the style seemed very dense. It seemed really hard to understand and like it was going to take a lot out of me. I don't know what got into me this time around, but I did not struggle with the language here at all. I read it in under a week. And so I'm really shocked to say that I read it so quickly, that I finished it, and that I really enjoyed it. This is 4 stars for me. This is, to me, the hit of the month. I really enjoyed this. This is the book that I think I have enjoyed reading the most. I enjoyed it more than Dorian Gray, believe it or not. I enjoyed it more than Dracula. And so this is one that I found very intriguing. And coming off of reading Dorian Gray, it was a very interesting experience because Dorian Gray has a lot of conversation around art and how the aesthetic of art is more important sometimes than the technique. This book had a similar discussion around art and literature and learning, which I thought was really fascinating. In fact, I'm kind of thinking of doing a full review on this because I had a lot of thoughts. And in actuality, I think thinking about this book and interrogating the themes at play in it, interrogating what she was trying to say in this novel, that has been a little bit more fun to me than the reading experience was, because I've thought on this frequently since finishing it, and I think that's where a lot of my enjoyment of it has been in just reflecting on the reading experience, on the themes she was discussing, because this is set in Renaissance Italy. So there is a lot of discussion around learning and literature, and Romola as a character, she's a title character, but again, akin to Daniel Deronda. I won't call her the main character of this book, but she is somebody who really wants to learn. Renaissance Italy, Renaissance Florence is seen as the center of learning and of this new age of art. Romola's kind of kept at length from it because she is a woman. And so it does kind of talk about the duality of the Renaissance and how it might have been progressive for some people, but it certainly wasn't for all. And also akin to Daniel Deronda, Tito, who I will call the main character of this book, I hated and despised so deeply. I didn't actually want to DNF it because of him the way that I did Daniel Deronda. I read this to spite Tito because I just wanted to see him get his comeuppance. And so this was a really interesting one, and I actually really recommend this, particularly if you love Florence, if you love the setting of the Italian Renaissance. This is just a treat to read. I am buddy reading The Ring in the Book by Robert Browning with Kate Howe and Roz from Scallydandling About the Books. And so I will link to their channels down below. We, all 3 of us, are struggling right now as of the time of filming. This is a very densely written narrative poem, and I don't necessarily like his style of poetry because he often jumps down to the next line of the poem in the middle of a sentence, and so the end of the sentence or just a comma, just a place where you would naturally pause in speaking, is in the middle of a line and not at the end of a line, which really is something that I struggle with in poetry. I love for there to be a natural pause at the end of the line of poetry. He does do it some, but he doesn't do it all the time. It's enough to really irritate me as a reader. And I've noticed I've been sampling a little bit of Elizabeth Barrett Browning this month as well. She does a similar thing, and that's something that just really bugs me as a poetry reader because I think it makes it hard to read the poem aloud. This is blank verse, so there's no rhyme in it, which I think would make not pausing at the end of the line a little bit more noticeable. But I think this is far denser than what I was anticipating. I'm hoping that as I get further into it, I can enjoy it a little bit more. We're all 3 of us feeling a little bit more confident if we move past this kind of introductory part, which is where we are right now. So that's kind of the poetry that I have been reading lately. But another success of the month, I will say my two favorites of the month so far have been Romola and reading Alfred Lord Tennyson. I really wanted to try some Alfred Lord Tennyson this month, and I am so glad I did. I have genuinely enjoyed reading him in such a way that I am just really pumped about The Idylls of the King. I would really like to read that and read that soon. I have just genuinely enjoyed his poetry thus far, and I've really liked his shorter works in particular. The Lady of Shalott, I will tell you, is one of my least favorite things from him that I've read thus far. I think there are other poems of his that are even greater than that. One of my favorites is To Virgil. He wrote a poem to Virgil, the poet, which is just amazing. He just has some genuinely lovely poetry, and I highly recommend him if you are looking to read some more poetry this month. I have really thoroughly enjoyed reading Alfred Lord Tennyson. So that's my month so far. I don't really know if I'm going to continue on with Daniel Deronda, and I don't really know if I'm going to continue on with Victober. I just feel like I've enjoyed the things that I've read, but none of them have been great. None of them have become new all-time favorites, which has happened for me in every previous Victober. So that's just really unfortunate to me. I have not read any Dickens this month, which is also unfortunate to me. I'm thinking that if I do, I will pick up Nicholas Nickleby instead of the ones that are on my TBR, because Nicholas Nickleby is the choice for the Dickens versus Tolstoy book club this month. And I think that I would like to read it and then have a nice discussion of it afterwards, rather than reading The Old Curiosity Shop, because a lot of people kind of warned me off of that one. And since I'm already feeling meh about most of the stuff that I'm reading, I didn't really want to pick up another book that I would probably also feel meh about. So I think if I do pick up another Victorian classic, it will likely be Nicholas Nickleby, or I will finish Daniel Deronda. Reading 2 George Eliots in a month, I can't believe it. I really cannot believe that I would ever choose to do something like that, but you never know. I would love to know down below how your Victober is going, and if you've had any new all-time favorites this month. But that's going to be all for me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Happy Victober. Goodbye.